My dear friend HEIDI ROSE ROBBINS.
So happy to be here with you. So happy to be here with you, oh live streaming audience. So we had the opportunity in the pre-conference to gather together for the Wesak full moon and to have a beautiful meditation. And you know, in a meditation, you hope for an image or you hope for a word or two. You know, if you can come away with a word or two, something has gone right. And it was a beautiful meditation, and it was very silent and very pure. And for me, there were just 3 words that came. And they were simply a living radiance. And the question, how do we become a living radiance? So I have been steeping in and thinking about and contemplating and attempting to embody or understand radiance for most of my life. It's an ongoing project, and one I assume will be my unfolding commitment for the rest of my life. One of the definitions of radiance is light or heat as emitted by something. And I would add, by someone, and I would add, and that includes you. So let's begin by saying in part that radiance is certainly light or heat emitted or reflected by each of us. One of my favorite quotes of all time is in Discipleship in the New Age. And Joel Kuhl is writing to Roberto Assagioli, and he says, "I ask of you no new thing, but only an increased magnetic radiance based upon an inner freedom which makes possible the relinquishing of outer shackles and chains, thus gaining a liberty which will extend through every department of your being." I think he's talking a little ways up, but he says, he asks of him only an increased magnetic radiance. And on one hand, it sounds so simple and so inviting, and I want that. You know, let's turn up our light, let's increase our radiance. But how exactly do we increase our magnetic radiance? There's no dial to turn. And how do we create the inner freedom which makes the increased magnetic radiance possible? And what exactly is it to relinquish outer shackles and chains, allowing that radiance and that liberty to extend through every department of our being? These are questions we hold, and as Rainer Maria Rilke says, we live our way into the answer. But these are also the questions I'd like to tackle and wrestle with in our time together. So let me just take you on a bit of a personal journey back to a little more than a year ago. I was on a private retreat in Ojai in February, thinking about the implications of my progressed moon moving into Scorpio and my progressed sun moving into Gemini. Simply put, I knew I was entering a 30-year period of increased bridge building and communication, and I knew that I had the opportunity in the next couple of years to strengthen and deepen, transform and shed in new and powerful ways. And the first thing that I found myself writing in my notebook after I took a walk, got my vanilla latte, took my nap, and stared at the ceiling, after that, the first thing that I found myself writing was radiance. And then radiant consciousness, and then radiance embodied, and finally I wrote the Radiance Project. I knew by the end of that little retreat that I wanted to continue with a renewed and newly committed effort to build a network of others interested in increasing our individual and collective radiance. I knew by the end of that retreat that my mission was no less than it has always been for many of us here, to foster a radiant and loving humanity. And certainly those words deeply overlap, radiant and loving. I remember the word radiant came to the fore for me in my early 20s when my father wrote me a very long letter. He was not thrilled with the man I was dating and used the full force of his very eloquent self to argue his point. 8 typed pages later, he ended the letter by saying, "Never compromise your true radiant self." He was speaking to my Leo rising, and it struck home. I woke up. I heard him, and this time, he was right. It's been almost 30 years since that letter sparked a journey to make radiance and embodied reality and not just an abstract concept. So, what is the Radiance Project anyway? I guess it's my Capricorn moon that loves the word project. You know, a project is defined as an individual or collective enterprise that is carefully planned and designed to achieve a particular aim. I think last year, at the time when Radiance Project came in, I was reading Roberto Assagioli's The Act of Will, and I think at the very end he also has The Will Project, so I will bow to that and say it came out of that as well. And as I said earlier, the vision I hold is no less than a radiant and loving and united humanity. And of course, we are all gathered here because we need light to win the day on this planet. We need to do it together. We need to work individually and collectively to tread a path of light. And, you know, here's the good news. And so many of us have been saying this in so many ways. The good news is that we can practice. We can apply ourselves in a myriad of tiny ways. We don't have to let overwhelm and chaos win the day. By exploring the idea of radiance, by delving into how light is the texture of love that underlies the happenings of our time, by committing ourselves to address what prevents us to truly turn up the light in our own being, we are doing the work. So a project requires time and attention, and a big planetary project like this requires cooperation and a good deal of selflessness, tolerance, and compassion. We need to educate, enliven, encourage those who walk with us to help us remember the essential truth about the light that we are. So, when have you felt most radiant? When have you felt your heart alight? When have you touched a light greater than your own and have grown in radiance as a result? I would submit sometime today, do you know? This past summer, I was at a low point, wrestling with a stubborn health issue, and I was extremely depleted and a little emotionally spent. But I was also determined to keep building and exploring, and most definitely called to keep creating experiences around radiance. I was at my low point, perhaps my lowest point physically in a long while, but one of my most determined spiritually. Have we been there before? Yes, I think so. In early August, I spent 3 days with my beloved friend and teacher, Sophia, and we talked about radiance nonstop. We walked, we ate, we slept radiance. But again, I was wrestling with physical limitation and a kind of hopelessness, really, around my healing path. Upon return, I happened to mention to a dear friend and client that I was considering launching a podcast called The Radiance Project. It was the end of our session, and we were walking towards the door, and she stopped me, and she grabbed my shoulders, and she looked into my eyes and said with total conviction and power, "You have to do this." And honestly, I made up my mind in that exact moment. I tell you this because it was the most unlikely moment for me to say yes, given my physical condition. But 2 weeks later, I had one day where I visited doctors throughout the day, and the next day when I launched my first podcast with my dear friend Elizabeth as my first guest. So, the last 6 months have been deeply significant for me as I am exploring this theme of radiance with many friends, and I'm sharing our conversations through the podcast, and I'm hearing from listeners all around the world that it is a light, a flicker of encouragement in a dark hour. So, poetry. I love poetry. And during this podcast, one of my dear friends, I'm asking everyone at the end of the podcast, I ask them, could you tell me a story of radiance in your life? Could you tell me a story when the light won the day? Could you tell me a story when you stood in your light and it made a difference? And she said, Heidi, I brought you a poem. And this is perhaps the best poem about radiance that I have ever heard. And it is by a poet and a painter and a minister named Jan Richardson. And I can't wait to meet her. I will meet her. I know I will meet her. But I just right now feel blessed to have discovered her work. And this poem is called How the Stars Get in Your Bones. And I would just like to offer you, the idea with poetry that this is for you. It is an intimate language that wants to reach out and kiss you. It is for you to hold your palms, like a cup, and receive. There is nothing about it that is too remote. This is a language that can pierce you like a touch from the greatest light. So, how the stars get in your bones. Sapphire, diamond, emerald, quartz. Think of every hard thing that carries its own brilliance, shining with the luster that comes only from uncountable ages in the earth, in the dark, buried beneath unimaginable weight, bearing what seems impossible, bearing it still. And you, shouldering the grief you had thought so solid, so impermeable, the terrible anguish you carried as a burden, now become, who can say what day it happened? A beginning. See how the sorrow in you slowly makes its own light, how it conjures its own fire. See how radiant even your despair has become in the grace of that sun. Did you think this would happen by holding the weight of the world, by giving in to the press of sadness and time? I tell you, this blazing in you, it does not come by choosing the most difficult way, the most daunting. It does not come by the sheer force of your will. It comes from the helpless place in you that despite all cannot help but hope. The part of you that does not know how not to keep turning toward this world, to keep turning your face towards the sky, to keep turning your heart toward this unendurable earth, knowing your heart will break, but turning it still. I tell you, this is how the stars get in your bones. This is how the brightness makes a home in you. As you open to the hope that burnishes every fractured thing it finds and sets it shimmering, a generous light that will not cease, no matter how deep the darkness grows, no matter how long the night becomes, still, 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 the secret of secrets keeps turning in you, becoming beautiful, becoming blessed, kindling the luminous way by which you will emerge, gathering your shattered heart like a constellation within you, singing to the day that will not fail to come. I think DK says, the love that never ceases. Here she says, a generous light that will not cease. Singing to the day that will not fail to come. I think of Harold. I think of how we started this conference. And this idea of always turning towards the light. Yeah. There are a few things that I'm learning about radiance. Number one, it is inductive. The light in you can spark the light in me, which then can light another heart or mind. It is an ongoing line, spiral dance of connectivity and energy and love and kindling. Two, there is always a greater light. Once I have stood in a greater light, my own light grows. Once I see the greatest light, all I have to do is, and she reminds us of this in this poem, turn towards the light, to keep turning towards the light, the sky, the broken earth, to turn and open to the light. The greatest light, as Jan Richardson says in this poem, kindles the luminous way by which you will emerge. You just need to turn and practice opening to it. Three, and this is one I always have to remember, given my lineage. Radiance cannot be efforted. Radiance is not a result of willing it to be so. Radiance is the byproduct of love in action. It is the light that is present when unconditional love is present. It is the energy created in any act of growth. Love and light is always left over in any act of growth. I think that comes right from Sophia. And to take this a step further, often the deepest radiance emerges, as Jan Richardson says, from the helpless place in you that despite all cannot help but hope. The part of you that does not know how not to keep turning toward the world, the soul self. Our fragility evokes our own compassion, and our compassion turns us again and again to where we can offer our light. Yeah. So in the spirit of radiance as inductive, this is a beautiful poem by Naomi Shihab Nye, and it's a favorite of mine. I've probably shared it here before. And it invites us to practice the connectivity of light. And it's a poem, it's an invitation, it's a practice. It's as simple as can be. And I love it for that. It's called Eye to Eye. Please forgive this interruption. I am forging a career, a delicate enterprise of eyes, yours included. We will meet at the corner, you with your sack lunch, me with my guitar. We will be wearing our famous street faces, anonymous as trees. Suddenly you will see me, you will blink hesitant, then realize I have not looked away. For one brave second, we will stare openly from borderless skins. This is my salary. There are no days off. And when we stare openly from borderless skins, we are staring soul to soul. We are recognizing and inspiring the light in one another. We are saying, I see you. Lily Cornford, a great student of the ageless wisdom and a true esoteric healer, was 80 years old when I met her in London in 1986. And I still will never, ever, ever forget, that time was full of synchronicity. I had gone to London to study acting, but when I think back on that year was one about spending time at this esoteric healing center. And it just so happened that in all of London, I had found a flat with my roommate, and I had been already feeling restless and nervous, and what am I doing here? And I happened to call because somebody had given me her information, and I called, and she lived less than a mile away from where my flat was. And I knew in that moment that, you know, this was meant to be. And I will never, never, never forget going to knock on the front door and Lily opening the door with these brilliant blue eyes. And I really almost did step back with the beauty of her light. But I bring up Lily, and she was so good too, because I did a lot of, like, I was always feeling sorry for myself that year, and she would just ignore me, or she would just be like, oh, come now, Heidi, you know, buck up, make me an egg salad sandwich, you know. So, I mean, she was just very good at, like, getting me out of my own 20-year-old, you know, angst. So the reason why I bring her up, though, is that she did profound work in the realm of healing with the use of color, and she particularly had great success with children. And particularly of note to the amazed doctors, she made great strides with autistic children. Something I will never forget is how she spoke to babies. She would look at them with her dancing blue eyes, and she would say, I see you in there. Hello, I see you. And I would, you know, you could just see her penetrating, and every baby just this light coming through the moment she started speaking, and exquisite to behold. So soul to soul, heart to heart, radiance to radiance. And of course, my friends, we can do this daily with one another. Borderless skins, quietly, deeply, truly, without fanfare, with eye to eye, with simple love and connection. I see you, I see your light. Hello. Hello, love. Yeah? In the spirit that there is always a greater light to inspire the kindling of our own, let's dive a little bit further into the poetry of Jan Richardson. This is a poem she wrote on how the light comes, and she wrote it as a blessing for Christmas Day. How the light comes. It's so beautiful because she's a minister, but she absolutely is. Every poem about Christianity is building the bridge to the metaphysical. How the light comes. I cannot tell you how the light comes. What I know is that it is more ancient than imagining, that it travels across an astounding expanse to reach us, that it loves searching out what is hidden, what is lost, what is forgotten, or in peril, or in pain. That it has a fondness for the body, for finding its way toward flesh, for tracing the edges of form, for shining forth through the eye, the hand, the heart. I cannot tell you how the light comes, but that it does, that it will, that it works its way into the deepest dark that enfolds you, though it may seem long ages in coming or arrive in a shape you did not foresee. And so may we this day turn ourselves toward it. May we lift our faces to let it find us. May we bend our bodies to follow the arc it makes. May we open and open more and open still to the blessed light that comes. Again, I mean, as I collected this poetry and thought about it, it's just stunning, the themes of opening and turning towards, tilting towards, shifting slightly, the tiniest gesture, yeah? Something about opening again and again, the invitation to turn towards the light, to lift our faces towards it, the invitation to open to the ancient and ceaseless great light that will burn away old obstruction to create greater inner freedom, the light that will eradicate the inessential. Yeah? So we can turn inward in meditation, in compassion, in curiosity and deep listening to the light within, and we can turn toward the greater light and let it work through us, through action, through thought, through word, through deed. You know, many of you perhaps know that we are now in a year when the planet Jupiter is in the sign of Scorpio, and it moved in last October. So the great light of Jupiter is shining into our deepest dark, collectively, individually and collectively. Rainer Maria Rilke says in a poem, he says, "Where I am folded, there I am a lie." Where I am folded, there I am a lie. Think of all the ways we fold in on ourself, where we hide something. So under Jupiter and Scorpio, we are unfolding our secrets, our lies, our hidden truths, individually and collectively. I mean, we really feel it collectively. The whole Me Too movement started the same week that Jupiter moved into Scorpio. Seriously, like within days. Come on, astrology works. We are letting what has been hidden out into the light of day. We are letting the light into the dark corners, right? So we turn towards, we open, and we also do the work to release us, as DK says, from the outer shackles and chains. We also do the work that consistently sounds the note of inner freedom. We wrestle the hydra of our physical, emotional, and mental instinctual reactions, and we lift the fear and pain into the light of day where it can dissolve in love. As the poet Joyce Sutphin says, we name every shadow as it slips. Right? We come out, we name it, we name it. When we name it, it can dissolve. When we can lift it and look at it and name it, it can start to dissolve. If it's tucked away and folded in on and curled around, then we're just going to limp around moaning, okay? So we name every shadow as it slips. So actually this poem is a poem that I wrote, and it's a poem that I wrote to aid me in the process of creating more inner freedom. Not that I would have named it that way at the time, but so that I might turn up the magnetic radiance and, dial it up a notch. So this poem is called Burn, and it is based on a quote that I was reading at the time by Hafez, and the quote is, "Love is the funeral pyre where the heart must lay its body." The contour of doubt, the shape of not enough, the crumple of imperfection, this ungainly, awkward body of fear, I lay now on the funeral pyre. Burn away the weight of perceived lack. Burn away the sadness of never enough. Burn away the need to be the first, the only, the brightest star. Burn away the critical eye. Burn to ash the one that withholds love for fear there is a diminishing supply. Set me ablaze with the resplendent beauty of the world. Fire me with the wonder of the gifts others give to light our way. Ignite in me the fierce lover of all, the one who stops at nothing to see another thrive. Burn this body of doubt and fear and leave me with the smallest ember of blazing truth. Let me tend that flame, the flame of the purest, most radical love, the eternal flame, the human heart. And I think many of us have been talking about this to this point. How do we burn away what holds us in its clutches? We turn towards, we invoke the greater light, we breathe in beauty. We love what we are given to love in a way that swallows the insufficiencies. We actually steep in a greater light, and from that receiving, we outshine the darkness. We practice outshining the dark, slightly, incrementally, infinitesimally, but outshining it. So we are not swallowed by it. We have to reckon with it. We can strike a match and the dark is no longer what it was. The tiniest gesture, I'm all about tiny gestures, the tiniest gesture towards the light is a movement away from the all-encompassing dark. And no act is too small, no gesture is too tiny. Every word that uplifts or ignites, enlightens, and it shatters the darkness. Every word, every heart kindles, adds to the world love bonfire. Our job daily is to bust through our own inner sludge. It's the work we each do to turn on our own light that liberates us all. It's not the time to hunker down and protect ourselves. As my friend Sophia says, love cannot be preserved. It can only be liberated and given freely. Can't hold on to love, right? So we have to turn the lights on in the gloomy patches of our being, and we have to at least lean towards the window where we can see the sliver of light and think about opening that window wider. Why? Because light is what we are, love is what we are, and everything else is something we picked up along the way and no longer need to carry. So, and sometimes the finest joy, the most exquisite love, the deepest radiance emerges from the greatest testing time, the greatest struggle, the greatest physical struggle, the greatest emotional struggle, from these states of exhaustion. It emerges through hard work well done. So there's this beautiful poem. Every time I read it out loud, I don't know, it opens something inside of me. And perhaps some of you know the poet Galway Kinnell. And it's about a boy in Illinois. And it's called First Song. And I want you to just meet this boy. Meet this boy in Illinois and feel yourself in him. Then it was dusk in Illinois. The small boy, after an afternoon of carting dung, hung on the rail fence, a sapped thing, weary to crying. Dark was growing tall, and he began to hear the pond frogs all calling on his ear with what seemed their joy. Soon their sound was pleasant for a boy, listening in the smoky dusk and the nightfall of Illinois. And from the fields, 2 small boys came bearing cornstalk violins, and they rubbed the cornstalk bows with rosins, and the 3 sat there scraping of their joy. It was now fine music the frogs and the boys did in the towering Illinois twilight make, and into dark in spite of a shoulder's ache. A boy's hunched body loved out of a stalk the first song of his happiness, and the song woke his heart to the darkness and into the sadness of joy. So a boy carting dung, uncomfortable, hard work, exhausted, weary to crying, starts to hear the frogs, starts to feel the nature around him, starts to feel that he is not alone in his sadness. Two boys come, he's no longer alone. He is now in good company. There are no words. There's only music made out of a cornstalk violin. And in spite of a shoulder's ache, he creates the first song of his happiness. And the song woke his heart to the darkness and to the sadness of joy. It's just exquisite. And these become touchstones, these moments, right? This moment from this boy's childhood that he can touch at any moment, because it's about community, and it's about music, and it's about nature, and it's about the heart, and it's about acknowledging the depths of sadness, and it's about finding the joy at the very heart of the weariness. And it's about the radiance that emerges. Why do we always say to people that are, having some great physical struggle or great exhaustion, why do they look so radiant? They do. The light is coming through. So I'm going to read one last poem that I wrote, actually, and it was 5 this morning, and I sat up in bed and started mumbling to myself about my talk, and I thought, this poem, strangely, I'd forgotten about this poem, and this poem is my journey around how we have to address what is in ourselves, how we have to work with tiny gestures towards the light, how we move into great self-compassion and self-forgiveness, yeah? And this poem, in fact, is called Wild Compassion. You know the days when you're better left alone? And if you happen to be in a dark corner, in a dark room, all the better for you and everyone else. The days when not even sugar or a stiff drink or your drug of choice makes a shred of difference in the landscape of sorrow. Or is it rage or fear? Whatever your flavor of closing down, curling up, slamming shut, however you refuse to shift, deny the light that just wants to cast a splash of hope across your cheek. You know the days when all you do is sit and stare, can't move your face to anything but lack everywhere, lack of hope, money, motivation, mojo. Doesn't matter how far I've traveled down any spiritual path, equanimity, poise, objectivity flung out the window at dawn. This life is a ride, people. Anyone who preaches from a pulpit and refuses to acknowledge the unstoppable raging current is not to be trusted. The ones to listen to have a wild compassion in their eyes that comes from riding that current on a makeshift raft crafted from loss and resurrection. Best thing to do with a day like this, as far as I can tell, is muster up a nod to it. A generous nod to the stranger walking through from parts unknown. If you can find the words or even just lift your head, invite him in for coffee black. Ask him why he's come, what he hopes to find here in this wild, wild wilderness. Listen up, he'll mumble, shed a tear, he won't make sense. Listen closely. Say your farewells and watch him walk into a fiery sunset. Watch him burn at the center, swallowed by the flames. Lay your head on your pillow and exhale. Give it away. The stranger, your day, all of it. Die into the darkness that will swallow your pain with its fierce love. Set down your honorable load. Then trust this. Morning light will touch your cheek. You need only to turn ever so slightly toward it. So, my friends, let's support one another. Let's be a light for one another. We can't do this alone. We are utterly interdependent. We can only do this together. We can only grow the light together, and until together we are each and all a living radiance, blazing in and as love. Thank you.